Martin is a colleague of mine and an expert, especially in the field of kind of crypto art. He's an amazing researcher, and he's very passionate about documenting the history of crypto art, but also kind of broader how that fits in the history of digital art and just in the larger context of art history. So he's an amazing person who's been involved since the very early days, and I think he's a perfect person to kind of share with us kind of the context about where crypto art fits in and how, what does blockchain native art kind of mean for the broader context of art history. So Martin, happy to have you here.
So maybe a few words about me.
Yeah.
I'm Martin Lukas Ostachowski. I'm an artist based in Montreal. I use clouds in my art because, I've been a nomad all my life, lived in 3 countries, moved over 30 times. But I find clouds are also like the perfect symbolism for blockchain in the meaning, it's in constant transformation. We talk about intangible values and it's, defying borders. But it also symbolizes for me some sort of fragility where it becomes a symbol of hope when people believe in it and maintain the network. It's an environment that can grow, but if people would stop believing in it, it would just dissolve like a cloud. And I play with that symbolism to bring people outside of crypto into the space and get familiar with some of these aspects. I've been working in traditional art for many years, and as such, I was always very frustrated about how linear the path in the art world was defined. In the meaning, you would start your career and you would look for some sort of group exhibitions, typically with artist centers and others. You would work your way through a series of group exhibitions until hopefully getting a solo exhibition, and then you would start climbing up basically a network of tiered galleries, which it's very, very linear and predefined. So I was excited discovering that crypto art would offer artists a path outside of this very linear path. And it has been fascinating to see how many artists were able to basically start making a living of their art and produce really cultural capital. So what I'm going to talk today about is I'll give you a short introduction into the history of crypto art. We're going to look at the definition of crypto art and my newest research project, really the quest for the essence. As such, crypto art is basically an evolution of digital art. Digital art itself is something which we have since the 60s. People have been using computers to create art, later on creating systems where others could use the computers to create their own art. And really the democratization of, or the access to personal computers and later the internet and net art really made it like a widespread movement or niche within the art world itself. However, it never solved one big problem, that it was interesting for the traditional art collector, because obviously something which is intangible and can be reproduced was conceptually a big issue. So in order to gain some sort of attractivity or attraction for traditional collectors, digital art had to always be paradoxically forced into physical medium to limit its distribution. So with the emergence of tokenizing art, basically we saw a potential to capture and solve this problem and get traditional collectors more interested in the field. Now, this really doesn't happen or didn't happen yet. But what we created with crypto art is we created a new type of collector, a new demographic of a new generation, which typically did not participate in the traditional gallery system before, but is tech savvy, which is a newer generation familiar with digital assets, and that created a whole new, basically, collector base. And as we've seen recently, entering more and more institutional collections, there is definitely, a slow path towards bringing digital art into a wider context. As such, when we look at crypto art itself, it all derived, obviously, also from the cypherpunks community. They were hugely influential, and their mailing list. So when the Bitcoin white paper launched within this community, and the time context of the subprime mortgage crisis, it was like a very interesting breeding ground for that idea. Nevertheless, on an artistic level, a lot of these values are still highly embedded into crypto art, like the idea of like the right for anonymity, the idea of a self-sovereign artist are, not only in some of the marketplaces merely lip service in like white papers and missions, but also like highly integrated into people who have been working in this space for a long time. The big problem crypto art had, or crypto in general, was it was very complicated. So it needed ways to be communicated, which was way more accessible. So one of the earliest representations were really physical Bitcoins in order to bridge this knowledge gap and create something which was tangible and understandable. A lot of the terms, really borrow from traditional money-making processes in order to reduce this complexity and make it just more accessible to people. But as you know, the space had its own mysteries with the anonymous founder of Bitcoin. We had, failures like the Silk Road marketplace and a lot of drama, such as the Mt. Gox controversy or other marketplaces which failed. So it was an element or a community which was kind of like very isolated. So art served some sort of ambassador or bridging basically these technological barriers to a wider audience. As such, it's also interesting to see how, the need for this identity really revolved around like finding some sort of a profit. And in 2014, when Dorian Nakamoto was falsely accused of being Satoshi Nakamoto, the whole community basically wrapped around the idea of having rather a wrong profit than none, because it needed some sort of just like visual identity. And this identity cascaded throughout the years when we saw this PFP mania in the recent years. This is nothing which, just started instantly, but really early representations of crypto art started very early on with any form of like representation of identity and customization. If we move forward, and look at the concept of tokenization, the Bitcoin or the blockchain itself is a concept which predates Bitcoin by 11 years. And that was the concept which was prominently introduced by Haber and Stronetta in 1997. And then it evolved, to the concept of like colored coins, which would augment the idea of cryptocurrency with real values. And it was really artists and technologists which pushed the boundaries even further, from early representations of domains, but even further, like Ria Myers, who tokenized their genome, hash genome on the blockchain, or even tokenized its soul. And if you look at the incremental innovation, I always like to look at it as a staircase where, you look at an evolution over 10 years, which a lot of incremental improvements or innovation, which all built on top of each other and augments the space as a whole. So when we had this early stage where individual artists and technologists were experimenting with this technology, really it was gaming companies which brought it to the next level, having just the funding and resources and introducing also economic concepts like play to earn. From there, it moved to creative communities, and they were pivotal among, or the most famous one was the Republic community, because while it was highly complex to tokenize in the early years, what the Republic community was, it was like, a group of people coming together, and what they did is they created basically a platform where they would remove the technological barriers. So people were able to submit their own art. Typically, these were people who already were, playing with these often card-based crypto games, and they were submitting their own designs, but they were not accepted. So there was definitely a need for like a creative outlet, but no place for it. So the Republic community was hugely influential by creating or involving a huge amount of people into the community and allowing them to tokenize art without understanding the whole technological background. From there, we moved to digital collectibles, which were, again, like driven mostly through companies, and they really helped augment the standards to where we are today. So projects like the CryptoPunks, which created a ERC20 hybrid, up to like the CryptoKitties, which would kind of like define the ERC 721 standards. It really helped bring the space forward and allow it to evolve towards a medium which can be used by artists. Later on, we saw dedicated art platforms because as more artists entered the space, it was important to really claim and also create space which was dedicated to art and not intermixed with games and collectibles itself. And the first art platforms are really also created by artists. I'm looking at specifically at Dada Art, which was artist-driven, or Artoline, which was also led by two artists from Gaskuyaska and Johnny Dollars. But really these art platforms, from initially artist-led, were also then accompanied by companies, and these companies had the resources to augment these ideas of tokens even further. So from early representations of only static images, JPEGs and GIFs, we would see later on, you know, generative art, we would see videos, we would see higher file sizes, just, you know, advancing the possibilities to be used as a digital medium. And then basically the emergence of crypto-based metaverses augmented just the whole idea of what tokenization and tokenized assets could be, and drive the innovation forward towards, you know, architecture and others. I think it's just important to remember that it is nothing which happened overnight, and it's something which really started incremental, where each kind of like dimension created a new step in order to foster this innovation. I spent a few years now documenting the CryptoArt, basically hundreds of hours trying to piece together the history. This started initially as a necessity because I created an artwork for an event. I worked several months on it, and I discovered later on that an artist has created something similar like that 4 years before me. So what started as a little project or a blog post really evolved towards an history trying to capture, you know, exhibitions, important art pieces, and the approaching of crypto art within the traditional art world. And as such, I've been working on defining crypto art and NFTs because in the last years, they have been used synonymously, why they are, in my opinion, not. So when we look at NFTs in the early years, and I'm talking like in 2018 and such, crypto art was really synonymous with art and collectibles, but this vastly changed when we saw the emergence of the metaverse, where an NFT would represent things which would definitely not be art, such as wearable names, real estate, and such on, but also in the physical realm, where we would see NFTs being used for tickets, licenses, certificates, and so on. So as such, we needed to redefine what really an NFT is, because it's no longer synonymous. I like to see it really like as a digital vessel, a medium which is defined much like a CD. So if you have music on a CD, it becomes a music CD. If you have art on a CD, it becomes art CD. If you have video on a CD, it becomes a video CD. And as such, I like to see NFTs really just like as a medium. So how do we contextualize that? I started working with this model of talking about blockchain-related art. And blockchain-related art would be art which basically falls into three categories. It would use blockchain in its broadest term, some sort of a subject matter or a theme. It could use crypto as a currency, which doesn't seem very exciting now, but a few years back when Lincoln Townley made his collection at auction only available for Bitcoin, it created worldwide news and promoted the currency within, you know, a wider audience. Or it can be basically used as a method of provenance. So in this case, I like to see whenever blockchain-related art intersects with crypto or with digital art, we create the sphere of crypto art, here highlighted in blue. And a part of it is NFT or art NFTs, while a big part of NFTs does not fall into the definition of crypto art. So NFT art or art NFTs are really just a subset of crypto art. If you want to break it down even further, we can say that crypto art, for me at least, is digital art which is conceptually fused to the blockchain, and that happens in three forms. We can use it by, utilizing blockchain technology such as smart contract to create artworks. Here's an example of Ria Myers, who created in 2014 a smart contract, and you would trigger a transaction and define for yourself if this contract is art or is not art. We had social tokens or social currencies. Here, an example from Kevin Abosch in 2018, which was a famous fundraiser piece, which would raise over $1 million back then to fund social causes. Or it is really the art NFT, which we know today. Here's an example of a rare Pepe card, one of the very few which are actually NFTs, because most of them are interchangeable, so they would fall really into fungible tokens. So looking at crypto art in these three categories and documenting the space, it was possible for me to redefine crypto art more from a technical perspective, but there was an aspect for me which is still or is missing, and that was a more ideological one. And as such, I started a new research project, which is really a quest for its essence. So why that? Because in the past few years, ever since the 69 million auction, the crypto art space grew way too fast. And as a community of artists and crypto artists, we just failed into establishing enough resources in order to educate newcomers to the space and promote the proper values. Because we wanted to create a system which is outside of this very linear gallery world and empower artists. We wanted to create with royalties, practices which would enable artists to live off their art. Also long term, it was an achievement which was really promoted as a big use case, while a lot of things were theoretical. Marketplaces were establishing, especially Dada, were promoting royalties, which was then adopted by all marketplaces. But when we saw that people were trying to bypass royalties on platforms like OpenSea and trying to really avoid it, marketplaces like SuperRare reduced their secondary royalties to stay competitive if you want to. So out of an initiative by artists, within a few months, artists came together and were supported by collectors and really created this 10% royalty standard, which is, as you might know, kind of more and more deteriorating with platforms really leaning heavily into DeFi and really commodifying art even more. But really, where crypto art is important is it promotes the artist's self-sovereignty and removes these gatekeepers. So what happened is really in the past few years, we saw a lot of venture capital and basically Web2 experienced entrepreneurs and influencers entering the space. And that posed a huge risk for crypto art, because these people basically disregarded all the achievements and standards in the space or achieved by artists. If you look at famously auction houses entering the space and entirely imposing their opaque practices into their auctions, where no bids were documented, people would not know who bids. At the end, they would just reveal who won, and these are like elements which were contradictory to the developments and standards we were trying to achieve here. So as venture capital entered the space and invested into these marketplaces, a lot of these initially noble missions and objectives for marketplaces, to empower artists, to give access to artists from all around the world, suddenly changed when big corporations started investing into marketplaces. Overnight, these marketplaces suddenly had to comply with regulations. So overnight, like artists from countries which were sanctioned were suddenly removed from their potential to participate in an economy by being just banned. And lastly, as the space grew so fast and we are not providing enough resources, uninformed newcomers were really trying to jump the bandwagon and accepting conditions of these new venture capital and Web2 players just because they didn't want to miss out. In this time was also when we saw these terms of NFT art and NFT artist emerge, because crypto artists really wanted to differentiate themselves from this new wave of creators which used crypto art or NFTs really just as a mere medium, while crypto artists had a much more stronger link to the values and concepts of cryptocurrencies behind it. So in this quest for essence, I'm currently interviewing as many crypto artists as I can in one-on-one interviews. And really the idea is to expand that later on with collectors and curators. But really the idea is to analyze the value and their importance in an overtime, because I would assume that, the later you enter the stage, your value system or interest in values would significantly change. And really the idea is with this survey to create some sort of a pluralistic resource, not only me defining it, but really capturing the spirits for as many people who are actually participants in the space, and not letting it defined by others. And as such, I hope to create a more idealistic addition to this definition, really to create a shared value-based vision, which is something which I hope will be a resource for newcomers to rally for. So while this is still an ongoing research project, and I think it's going to take me at least several months, if not a few years, to really capture as many crypto artists as possible to create this wide base, a few things are already very evident from my early discussions with these artists. It's really like this tremendous passion and care for the space, because it is just an alternative to these power structures in the traditional art world. So if you're not familiar with the traditional art world, this tier gallery system where you have like on the lowest bottom galleries for emerging artists, which would scout talent, and as an artist becomes more popular, is typically poached by the respective next tier of galleries. And it creates this whole power structure where the galleries on top become the tastemakers, really creating a pyramid where very, very few people can make a lot of money. So crypto art created for us with the idea that we can change this whole concept where not a few people are making a lot of money, but actually a lot of people could make a living of their art and create cultural capital, which is the social fabric of a society and culture. Another really interesting aspect I seems to crystallize in these early interviews is really that the community is above the individual advancement. And this is something which is interesting to remark, because for people who are longer in the space, obviously the advancements for us as a group of creators or as a community itself is much more important than necessarily the short-term gains of individuals. And really our strength is in numbers. If you think about it, how the royalty standard was achieved, it is fascinating to me, even that for me as an individual, a few years back, I was asked to work with a marketplace, and I said, I'm not comfortable to work with this marketplace because they don't support royalties. So much to my surprise, they said, okay, we're going to introduce royalties. And I was just stunned, because if I as an individual can basically change how a marketplace operates or how a participant in this market operates, just imagine if we come together as a group of artists, as we did a few years back when we introduced the royalty standards. And one of the most important elements right now is really the importance of decentralization, because we see currently huge trends against it. So what do I mean with that? We see a lot of centralization. So we see venture capital heavily investing into the space, but also in critical crypto art infrastructure such as marketplaces. So we have venture capital projects which are backing tools which try to bring artists away from these, a lot of independent marketplaces. We see venture capital operating their own marketplaces. And in this extended crypto winter, we see, a lot of marketplaces struggling to the point where some of them are not able to maintain business. And this is worrisome, because these venture capital backed project and marketplaces, they're having right now the field day, because they see their competition is basically disappearing, and having this deep pockets as venture capital, they just wait it out and are able to become again a replica of the traditional art world, where a few people are going to become the tastemakers. So I think that is an aspect where it's very important for us to raise the flag and really heavily promote these values, so people are just aware what really is important to the core, and what is important for us to claim CryptoArt as our own space and not replicate a system which we wanted to disrupt in the first place. Summing it up, where it's headed, like right now we talk a lot about NFTs, but CryptoArt was so much broader and more interesting a few years back. We had projects like Breathe and Blochian, which would use basically your breath or the pressure of your buttocks to create art. But we had also a lot of projects with real world impact, such as BailBlock, which was an app which people could install and which would mine Monero tokens, which would be used to fund bails for immigrants. Or we had here a commission piece by Julian Oliver, which was Harvest, and it used regenerative energy to mint, again, Monero tokens, and then use that money to fund environmental research. So over the past 2 years, we are kind of like in this eye of the storm or eye of the tornado, where everything is kind of stale and boring because it seems to revolve only around NFTs. And as it is with tornadoes, I'm really excited for the future because as we see right now, some sort of saturation, it always fosters innovation, right? Because if everything looks the same, everything is merging and becoming similar, it really takes, again, people to break things and innovate to stand out and advance to the next level. As such, Gordon and I were talking, or were speakers recently in South Korea, and I'm sure if anybody's interested, we can get you access to some of these panels I displayed there. This is the definition panel, but also kind of like a concise overview of the history of CryptoArt. But really, in a nutshell, the common denominator of CryptoArt is really, it's a movement of values and not necessarily aesthetics. And that's something we just need to promote. And really, if we are able to educate newcomers to the space, if we are able to create the resources, we can steer the discussion in a way which is meaningful for us as a group, for us as a community, because really our biggest weapon is choice with whom we work, with whom we support. Choice is how we want this marketplace or environment to look like. And yeah, I invite you, if you're interested in it, to check out the timeline. It's something I've been working on since 2020. It has 500 or more milestones, seeing this incremental development to where we are today and where we hopefully are headed towards. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin.